खोजो 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 खोजो.
Good afternoon, everybody. My honor. I am not a historian. I read history books and I teach history. So we are talking about reimagining Indian history. So I'd like to reverse the order a little bit. Let's talk of challenges first with our panelists, and then we'll talk of opportunities. So good afternoon, Meenakshi Ji. I want to start with you. You have had quite a distinguished and exceptional journey. So can you appraise our listeners what has been your journey and what has been the challenges you have faced?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it has been a long journey. I taught in Delhi University for a long time. And while I was teaching there, I realized how large parts and significant parts of our important past do not figure in the curriculum at all. And I'd just like to give you one or two examples. One is that when I was teaching Sikh history, the syllabus only had teachings of Guru Nanak and Kabir. So that seemed, perfectly all right until I learnt later of the injustices and the cruelties that the Mughals had meted out to the Sikh gurus. So under the pretext of including the teachings of Guru Nanak, there was no reference to the persecution that Sikh gurus faced in the entire Mughal period. That was one dimension. And just to give you another dimension, the entire Maratha history. We were not taught anything about the Peshwas or even Shivaji. Shivaji was referred to in a most derogatory manner. But the fact that the Marathas built an all-India empire, when they posed such a threat and challenge to the Mughals and even to the East India Company, this was a story of such valor that was just totally missing from our textbooks. Now you're talking about the struggles. Actually, I realized how difficult it was to challenge the dominant left narrative. When I first wrote my book on Ayodhya, I based my book on meticulous research, but 4 leading publishers rejected my manuscript one after another. And the reason that they gave was, I said it's very meticulously researched. And they said, yes, it is meticulously researched, but it is arguing the case for the temple. So how can we publish a book which is making the case for the temple? So, it's all very well today that we have come quite a long way. But the struggle has been totally a very, very difficult struggle. And at an individual level, some of us may have got out of the clutches of the left dominant school and narrative. But we must remember that the history curriculum that is taught in the schools and the universities is still dominated by the left narrative. So in the curriculum that is taught in the universities of Delhi and JNU, I can talk about, we still do not hear anything of the Mughal persecution of the Sikh gurus. To just give you one example, we do not hear anything of the proud Peshwas. There is so much narrative that is just totally missing. So it will take quite some time for us to rectify the errors and the omissions in our narrative, and that is what I'd like to emphasize in the first round.
So I never missed this opportunity to tell this in a public forum. Meenakshi Ji was commissioned to write a textbook on the medieval era, and it was pulled down by the UPA government. It is today in archives.org. But anybody who wants to make a correction with their children outside the curriculum, please download it, please read it. My school allows me to use content that I choose, and I use it for my students.
I just want to add one thing, since you talked about the textbook. The textbook that was written by Professor Satish Chandra was in all the schools for at least 20 years. And it said about Jahangir. Jahangir ordered the execution of Guru Arjan. But it never mentioned Jahangir ordered the execution. It was very finely worded as the death of Guru Arjan by Jahangir. Now, a 15, 16-year-old child who doesn't know the history of what happened to the Sikh gurus, how can he make out from this one sentence, death of Guru Arjan by Jahangir? So that will give you some idea of the absolute meticulous way in which a group of our historians try to whitewash certain episodes of our past and to exonerate the views and the deeds of our rulers and other sections of that society. Thank you.
So our panel is pretty interestingly composed. So we heard from a career academic in Meenakshi ji. Now I'll ask you, Omendra ji. He is a surgeon by profession and yet he has a passion for history. What brought you to write about history and what are the challenges you have faced?
What brought me to history was a tweet by Shri Sanjay Dikshit ji, where he mentioned the Battle of Diver being the most important battle of the life of Maharana Pratap. I, coming from Rajasthan, prided myself in being a very educated Hindu and a history buff, and I said, I have never even heard of Diver. So I went to Diver, which is about 280 kilometers from Jaipur. I saw the physical evidences of the war, and I said, if this is the situation with a so-called awakened Hindu, what about the Hindu masses who have no idea what's going on? So I started writing about Battle of Diver, and in the process, when I came across the original sources of Rajasthan history by Shamil Das ji Dadwadia, James Todd, Professor Rajendra Bhatt, Professor L.P. Mathur, I was flabbergasted by the saga of the Sisodia dynasty, which fought Islamic invaders consistently without even one king thinking of compromising for 1,000 years. So I said, I being a charan with the Bard community of Rajasthan, I said, this is my duty to take this, my art of storytelling and backed with reasonable historical accuracy. I don't boast that I'm a historian. I've not dug up the archaeological evidences. I neither had the time nor the inclination. That is a thing for the scientists, history scientists to do. But I have put the history in this book, Maharanas. And if anybody among the audience or the friends sitting here, do read the prelude and do read the 10th chapter. Because I cried tears of blood when I was writing that chapter. 10,000 Hindu women gave themselves to fire on 25th February 1568, the third Saka Jauhar of Chittor. Nowhere in the history of mankind has Islamist invasion faced such a valorous resistance as they faced in Mewar. So the challenge here is the historians of this country have not only fiddled with the history of this country, they have destroyed it. I can perfectly understand how lonely ma'am would have been in her fight with these thugs. And on a civilizational plane, as a very committed Hindu, my angst against these historians is, you spread lies in the history telling of this country. There should be a neutral commission constituted by international historians. Let them judge. If these people are found as culprits, they should be penalized, their degrees taken away from them, and a Truth and Reconciliation Commission set for the wrong that has been done to Hindus. To end my challenges thing, I'll quote a poet in 4 lines, because at the end of the day, we ourselves are also responsible for this darkness, this dark spot of Hindus about their own history. We could never connect the dots that if Islam had swept over the Indian subcontinent, how are we 100 crores today? We could not even come to the linear conclusion of this fact. So, to sum it up, these 4 lines, and this reflects on the darkness, the sloth of the Hindu Samaj, not to do with the historians. खुरो खस तो रुके, घोड़े के खुर रुक जाएं, रास्ता तो चले. let the path move. मैं अगर थक गया, काफिला तो चले, let the caravan move on. चांद सूरज बुजुर्गों के नक्शे कदम, all beautiful things, huh? चांद सूरज बुजुर्गों के नक्शे कदम, खैर जाने दो इन्हें, हवा तो चले. वाइस कहते हैं रिलीजियस आदमी को. अजब शहर है वाइज ये तेरा, वाइस कहते हैं रिलीजियस आदमी को. अजब शहर है वाइज ये तेरा, मस्जिदें बंद हैं मैं कदा तो चले. And pay attention to this last line. बेलचे लाओ, हिंदू समाज को मैं चुनौती देता हूं, बेलचे लाओ खोदो दिल की तहें, बेलचे लाओ खोदो दिल की तहें, मैं कहां दफन हूं कुछ पता तो चले. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Aabhas also has an interesting journey. He is an architect by profession, but also a very interested person in history. So Aabhas, what's your journey? What have been your challenges? And how do you reimagine history?
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. So, as my profession goes, I am an architect. And I do always see that somehow architects and historians have janmantar ka rishta. Because what I will build as an architect will become the case study for the people in future to dig the history. And then that will tell you the tale of the past. So somehow architects and the historians always will have this very interesting relationship of the past and the future and the present. Now, yes, as far as my journey is concerned, it certainly has had a strong reflection of my father. He is a historian. He retired as a professor of history. And my childhood would just pass in through listening the anecdotes of history while he will give extra classes to the students who would come in the house to get a few more. But those tales would be there embedded in my mind. Somewhere the stories of the kings and the queens will always be very fascinating. But as Dr. Vikram Sampath says that a student's life with the history or dabbling with the history just stops after he is out of the school. But fortunately, I became an architect and I had a subject called History of Architecture. While dealing with history of architecture, a lot of interesting aspects came in. We do read history of architecture for, say, 5 semesters out of 10. But while we were reading in detail about the Roman architecture, Greek architecture, but there was very less emphasis put on to what we do in India. There was not much about the indigenous history. But yeah, like any other Macaulay Putra, even I was more fascinated towards knowing more about the West. And that's when, entering into the architecture school, I got influenced with the idea of communism very strongly. And when I say it, I say it from utmost sincerity because in architecture, we come across a lot of movements which are political in nature, like we categorize the buildings and the architecture in terms of modernism, postmodernism, and that's how we read it. And if an architect does have an interest into looking into this literature much more, they will get into the political aspect of this art movement. And if you read the modernism and postmodernism, and when you get into the works, how it originated, like from the works of Derrida and all, you will tend to fall into the trap of communism if somehow a rational iota of you has made you to believe that my past or my traditions have some malices. And that was the case with me. But yes, fortune shined upon me, and it was a journey to the Ajanta caves. I'm sure that people would be aware about the great Ajanta caves. And that's where my sting with the communism just stopped. So I was out there for a study tour, and I had gone there as one of the lecturers. I was teaching at a college that time. And while I went to into the caves, I found something very interesting, unlike of the cave architecture. When you enter inside any of the caves, generally you step up further. But within the Ajanta caves, there are depressions. You step down into the caves. I was curious to understand that why these caves have got the depressions. Then I got in touch with one Professor Deshpande from Aurangabad. He's a very senior architect and he's considered of very high esteem in academia of architecture. Then what he told me was something very surprising and very interesting. He asked me the question that you see that there are so many paintings inside the caves. How are they made? I said that, of course, they will need the light inside the cave. What was the source of light back then? So the source of light was either the fire or it has to be sunlight. There was nothing else. If you use the fire to have the light inside, then the carbon will spoil the paintings which are there because they are organic in nature. So then he asked me, then how do they get the light? I just thought for a while, but I couldn't come to the answer. Then he showed me a model, a wooden model, what he had of the Ajanta caves, and he brought a torch and put some water inside that section of that cave, of the wooden model, and the light reflected back. He told me that the people used to use a concept of the reflection of light to do the painting inside. And I was like, the people whom I thought to be the superstitious one, they were so brilliant that they were using the so-called snail's law to generate light and hence do the painting. And that's where the journey began. And then I thought that I will write a book around the mysteries of Ajanta caves, basing it to be a fiction. I wrote that book. It was a tale of fiction, and it went to a very popular literary agent. Someday I will do name about that agent as well someday. So everything is going very fine. It's 2015, and the award Vapsi scenario happens. It's around October, if I'm not wrong. The agent has taken up the book, very eager to publish it. I have been showered with a lot of praises that this book is going to break so many things, like how a person will just tell you when he or she is wanting to sell the product. But award Vapsi happened and I got a regret email that somehow our ideologies don't match. But mind you, I was still a communist in 2015. 2014, Modi reign had not made me a so-called right-wing. I was still a communist. I got a cultural shock that a kind of rejection is there. And then I started looking into the aspects of history back then. And then what I started finding, they were just baffling. One by one, like you say that you start removing the carpet and yeah. So, because yeah, we are in a dearth of time. So largely I would say that it was the instinct with the communism and then how I got back out of it, that brought me into re-look into the history more seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, and very, very interesting indeed. So the second academic in the panel, Sreejit, tell us about your journey and so far the challenges you have faced to bring forth your narrative.
Yeah, thanks, Alodi. I think the challenges in writing and reading Indian history, as I see them, are very well summarized by one particular essay by Rabindranath Tagore, which he had written at the time of what we call Bongo Bhongo, the first attempt to partition Bengal that was done by the British administration, led by the then Viceroy Lord Curzon. So writing in 1905, Tagore pointed out in this particular essay, which he titled Bharatbarsher Itihas, simply History of India, that the history that we read in our textbooks in order to pass our examinations is nothing but the tale of a particular period in India's time, India's life, in the life of the Indian civilization, which is nothing but a nightmare when the sun of India had already set. And then he goes on to point out that there is something called the national spirit, which is very, very difficult to pinpoint. And people who are from other countries, for example, people from the British Isles or from France, even they would find it very difficult to put in a few words or define what their national spirit is, where the life of the nation, from where they come, where they belong, resides. So that is the main challenge. And for me, it is not so much of reimagining or rewriting. I think it's simply writing of history, because history is essentially a narration. It needs a narrator. And much like translation, it needs to be written anew with every passing age, because as time progresses, we get enriched with new information, and we have newer insights, deeper insights. So therefore, time itself necessitates us to write history with every passing age. For me particularly, the kind of matter that I'm looking into right now is the history of the Bengali revolutionary nationalists who had been active between the period of 1905 and 1945. And the main challenge that I see in writing their history, or whatever written material is already out there, is that the approach that has been taken so far in telling their story, narrating their history, is that of an out-and-out materialist and economic approach. The problem with this approach is, and I'll give you an example of it, the story goes like this. They're trying to explain the phenomenon of how the Bengali revolutionary nationalism as a historical phenomenon came up. And the explanation would be, it is very complex, but I'll give you the bare basics of it, that there is a class which is called Bhadralok, and also there is an angle of caste in here, because the Bhadralok class, which is an economic class, all belong to the so-called upper castes, and therefore they are supposed to be privileged and chauvinistic, proud. And it also happens to be the case that these people were at the forefront of those Indians who had gotten themselves educated into the English system, which were newly introduced around 1835, in 1840s onwards, and the universities came up in Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, in 1856 and 7. So these people gotten themselves educated in the English system, and they were expecting to be finding the creme de la creme positions in the British administration's day-to-day running, like in the administrative services or in the universities and so on and so forth. But the reality turned out to be not so, rosy. And they were bitterly disappointed. And it is this disappointment, this is this angst of the economic class called Bhadralok, which propelled them to take up arms against the British. I think this is a very, very, not to call it crooked, but one-sided, to say the least, view of this entire phenomenon. I think there is an entire cultural process that had been set into motion by people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and even going back, right from the Vaishnavite movements in Bengal led by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and so on. And then came all these people who got exposed to Western ideas, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the Brahmo Samaj. And then came Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda. All these people have a major role to play in setting the stage for the phenomenon of Bengali revolutionary nationalism to rise. This particular viewpoint is more or less absent in the present historical narrative about this particular phenomenon, and I'm trying to capture that.
It is not only absent, but I will also say this, that the right wing has some very interesting notions about the Brahmo Samaj and Raja Ram Mohan Roy that keep cropping up, and I'm waiting for this book to come out so that, the records are set straight in the way it should be with the context of the time. It's a little shocking to me, but since I am no historian, I'm waiting for someone to do a scholarly work to look at this aspect very, very in detail and with references of the time. Thank you so much. Can't wait to read what you come up with.
You're welcome.
Meenakshi ji, before I talk to you about the opportunities that you see today, there is something I want to, I'm a little tired myself of this left narrative. But tell me one thing. After they had the hegemony, has anything in terms of primary data source, secondary data source, new research, new angle, improved or enlightened or shed light on their narrative as opposed to the nationalist historiography? Has anything changed since that we keep on bringing them back to discourse?
Actually, their relevance now is only confined to a few universities. Because what has happened in the last 2, 3 decades is that the ordinary person, ordinary individual, has shown us the way we can bypass this entrenched group. Social media has been such a powerful instrument in disempowering the entrenched leftist narrative. You see, what has happened is that because of the writings of certain individuals, like I can name Vikram Sampath, Sai Deepak, I include myself in that, we have created interest in ordinary people who are not necessarily historians. And they have been prompted to present their view, their community's view, their family view of what the past was, the remembered view of the past. Now, it is very interesting that when I began to research from what I don't call a right narrative, but from a nationalist perspective, I think this word right and left, at least the right is not a misnomer, and the proper word should be nationalist historian or nationalist viewpoint. And when I started looking at our past, I was so totally amazed that till the advent of the so-called left historians, the people of this country were so in tune with the heritage. They were so in empathy. They never had to be told, this is your history. They knew about it. And the most important event in the last 1,000 years, which so many people have referred to, is the attack on our cultural spaces in the long medieval period. The attack was so severe that in the entire North India, there was no sacred structure left standing. Even in cities like Mathura and Kashi, whatever you see today is created after the 18th century. But you scratch beneath the surface and you're absolutely amazed at ordinary people who took pains to record, to write what they had gone through, what they had seen. It is absolutely phenomenal. You've all heard of Mahmud Ghaznavi. Perhaps you do not know that there is an eyewitness account of his invasion of Somnath, which was written by a person who was live and witness to that. We know of Mahmud Ghaznavi, but how many of us know that we recorded it? There is another person, Jin Prabhasuri. He traveled all over North India in the 14th century, recording the destruction of every shrine. And he tells his community, don't be disheartened. The images are as powerful as before, even though they are mutilized, even though they have been mutilated. In the south, we have the princess of Vijayanagar. Ganga Devi is her name. She is writing when the Turkish invasions from the north are destroying South Indian cities. And she writes a Sanskrit kavya. She's the Vijayanagar princess. She writes a Sanskrit kavya, Madurai Vijay. And she says that, the goddess came to my husband in a dream and handed him the sword of Dharma. And she said, get up and do your duty, restore Dharma. So, this kind of native voices. At Tirupati, we have a 100 stanza poem written in Telugu in the medieval period, talking about the attack on Tirupati. So all these native voices, they were there, but we were not looking to them because we wanted to present history from one particular point of view, and that was a Western perspective, imported perspective, but we never wanted to see India through Indian eyes. So this opportunity that we have now got, which everyone is participating in, because the ordinary people, for example, people who are sitting in the audience, they don't have to be told, get the Marxist history out of your mind. It's already out of their mind. Because, they are the bearers of our cultural heritage. Really, it's not a laughing matter. I really believe it very sincerely that these people, they knew about it. And they are the ones who encouraged us. The kind of people who see any talk of ours on YouTube is much more than will read our books. We don't expect so many people to read our books. It's not necessary for them. But the popularization of our alternative viewpoint is due to this young generation which is sitting in the audience, which is viewing our YouTubes, and encouraging us and prompting us in every way. So on behalf of a newly rising class of historians, I have to thank you all for your support. Thank you.
No, Meenakshi ji, actually, I love the fact that you don't deride the youth, because there is such a lot of lament of those were the golden days that it actually sickens me. So yours is really a breath of fresh air for all those skeptics who think we are going down the drain. Omendra ji, what opportunities do you see now? Do you see forums like these, readership, responses to your writing or videos? What are the opportunities you see?
Certainly, the left was having a field run. And then Mahadev blessed us with internet. Left and their jihadi facilitators will not survive internet. The truth, सत्य हर चौराहे से बोला जाएगा और बोला जा रहा है. अब आपको मैं थोड़ा सा एक चैलेंज देता हूं, थोड़ा संवाद करते हैं. जब हम भारतीय उपमहाद्वीप के ऊपर हिंदू मुस्लिम संघर्ष की बात करते हैं, क्योंकि मैं शब्दों की घालमेल नहीं करता. आई डू नॉट इग्नोर द एलिफेंट इन द रूम, एंड द एलिफेंट इन द रूम इज इस्लामिक जिहाद, जिसको हमारे पुरखों ने 1400 साल से रेजिस्ट किया है. इयन ऑस्टिन, एक ब्रिटिश हिस्टोरियन, लिखता है, अगर हिंदुओं ने इस्लाम की बहती हुई धारा को भारत में नहीं रोका होता, पे अटेंशन टू दिस, अगर हिंदुओं ने इस्लाम की बहती हुई धारा को भारत में नहीं रोका होता तो पूरा का पूरा विश्व इस्लामाइज हो जाता. डू वी रियलाइज क्या इस स्टेटमेंट का क्या सिविलाइजेशनल इंप्लीकेशंस हैं? तो फिर ये जो लेफ्टिस्ट थे, ये किसकी दलाली कर रहे थे? दे वर पिंपिंग जिहाद. That is the scale of washout. So go and read this book, Maharanas. Honestly, I wish somebody could write about the Kakatiyas of Andhra. Somebody could write about the Gaudas of Karnataka. Somebody could write about the Solankis of Gujarat. Somebody could write about the Jats of Delhi. How every inch of this beautiful Vedic bhumi has resisted the Islamic invasion. Now, coming to my question, if we think of 3 kings in the 1400 years Hindu-Muslim saga, what are the 3 names that come to your psyche? Can somebody from the audience tell me? Shivaji Maharaj. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj.
Vijayanagara?
Vijayanagara is again.
Yeah, but the empire.
Pratap का तो नाम बोलोगे?
Maharana Pratap?
Maharana
Yes.
Pratap and Guru Gobind Singh जी. अब मेरे प्यारे हिंदुओं, ये तीनों के तीनों राजा 16वीं शताब्दी में हुए थे, जिनमें 2 तो 17वीं शताब्दी में हुए थे. और भारत पर पहला इस्लामी आक्रमण कब हुआ था?
Anyone?
I'm just putting a mirror in front of you. 712 AD. यार इसको एक फ्री बुक मेरी तरफ से, जिसने भी बोला है, कम से कम 8th century पे तो आ गया. Do we understand the collective Hindu consciousness responds to the Hindu-Muslim conflict which has been going on for 1400 years in the 16th century? We have no collective memory that the actual Islamic invasion of India started by Muhammad bin Qasim in 712 in the 8th century. Forget the names of the kings. Bappa Rawal, Rawal Jaitar Singh, Rawal Allad, Rawal Khuman, Rawal Ratan Singh. So that is the scale of washout. But coming to opportunities, they will not survive internet. And about last month, I came across these 2 lines, which is amazing in the sense that in a nation infested with the disease of Gandhi's ahimsa, a poet is writing, युद्ध नहीं जिनके जीवन में वे भी बड़े अभागे होंगे. The glory of war. युद्ध नहीं जिनके जीवन में वे भी बड़े अभागे होंगे, या तो प्रण को तोड़ा होगा या फिर रण से भागे होंगे. that is the opportunity, as ma'am has talked, the youth clapping to Sanatan Hindu Dharma rising, reclaiming its lost glory, reclaiming that we were never defeated by the forces of jihad. And that इनका अब्दुल हाली करके कोई है, कोई इस्लामिक राइटर, वो लिखता है कि जो अरब का जो काफिला था रेड सागर लाल सागर होता हुआ, वो गंगा के मुहाने पे आकर डूब गया. तो हमें बहुत गर्व से अपने हिंदू होने पर और हमारे यशस्वी पुरखों के त्याग के ऊपर अंतिम बात करूं. मैं एक साल में या 1.5 साल के अंदर एक चुनौती देने वाला हूं हिंदू समाज को. 25 फरवरी 1568 का तीसरा साका अकबर द डिबॉच ने करवाया था. उसको हमारे देश में अकबर महान करके पढ़ाया जाता है. ये निकृष्टता हमारे साथ होती है. एंड वी मेक मूवीज ऑन हिम. We make movies on the person who murdered 40,000 Hindus in one day. And this is the Islamic scholars saying, not a hate monger like me. So, when I give this call to the Hindus of this nation, 1 lakh Hindus have to come to Jantar Mantar and force this government that remove the name of Akbar the Great from the textbooks of this country, and that chapter should be dedicated to one and only Maharana Pratap Singh of Mewar. Thank you.
I don't think removing is a good thing because he did exist. But I think repositioning and contextualizing is what's important. Removing is probably not the solution. Aabhas, now come to you. While you talk to me about opportunities, since you are not a career historian, you will be attacked for ahistoricity or lack of academic training, and that entire thing will come to you. So what are the safeguards that you need to have even as you exploit the opportunities ahead of you right now? What are the pressures of excellence in academia? Take mine.
So, as right now I'm working on a 6-volume series on the history of quote Mughals unquote, who are actually not Mughals, because they call themselves Timurid Gurkhaniyas. So it's more of a European interpretation of calling them Mongols because of the lineage how they were trying to draw it too. Now, when my book would be coming out, there would be certainly a lot of murmurs. I have already seen a lot of things happening while it was pushed to the publisher. The question was raised that you change the narrative. So I have been publisher to publisher and back and forth, a lot of things have happened. Now, I had to safeguard myself from a very principled point of view. And that principle was laid by Jadunath Sarkar long back. So while he was leaving the profession and he was retiring in 1957, he wrote to his pupils and to his pupils. And he said that the time has come when we have to look into the scientific exploration of the history. We have to command the language of the authorities who have written it. Now, this what Jadunath Sarkar said gave me the opportunity as well as the challenge. Challenge lied in understanding the language of the authorities who have written it. So, when I was researching into the Mughal history or the Timurid history, the primary manuscript which exists is definitely in Persian right now, because Akbar had translated the Turkic version of it, and that's how it exists. So, internet, as Dr. Omendra said, that has definitely come out as a boon. So, I started learning Persian at my own. So, internet gave me this opportunity to somehow control the language of the authorities who have laid the primary sources. So, when my book comes out, so at least people can't blame me that I don't know the language of authorities, because those whom I'm gonna rebut or rather bring a case contrary to them, many of them are not very well aware about the Persian. So that's the point number one. Second point is this, that I have certainly looked into referring to a lot of works of the so-called left-leaning historian as far as the economic condition of India is concerned in the Mughal period. Yeah. So they have collated a lot of data So that's certainly helping me out. And if you put across an analysis across it, so say a period of Akbar is being spoken about, then say if the GDP is increasing and if GDP per capita is decreasing, so you see two kind of graphs. One is going up while the money with the people is declining. So it certainly means, by analytical point of view, that people are being oppressed. So these are the kind of safeguards which I am applying. At the same time, as far as the scientific exploration, which was dictated by Jaduna Sarkar, that you have to look into it, I got very serious about it. And that whole saga of 712 AD of bin Qasim, I am still not been able to swallow in, because the first source which spoke about it came in 892. That is the works of Al-Balduri. Then further we had more writing. Then Chachnama appeared, which is said to be based on writing, 8th century writing. But Chachnama was actually commissioned by somewhere around 13th century, if I'm not wrong. It was around that period. So bin Qasim, a 17-year-old guy who ravishes whole of the Sindh, and the civilization from which he is coming from will not talk about him from around 150 years. This was not possible. Now, I also started exploring into the history of Islam at the same time, because it was important. It is the period when the hadiths are being written under the Abbasids. And lots of hadiths are compiled, lot of contradictions exist in the hadiths, lot of exaggeration happening in the tale. And this Al-Balduri is also under the patronage of the Abbasids. So that kind of gave me a rationale or a hint that perhaps this story is not exactly the way it has been told. There was something more to it. So I do see that there's a dark cloud in front of me right now, but I want, as a next level of project, I want to explore more into it, perhaps somehow getting into the Sindh, getting hold of some local Sindh literature, that what they say more about it may just shade more light what exactly was in and around 712 plus 10 years or minus 10 years, what we would call an exact primary source. So yeah, so that's to summarize. Again, I'm seeing the time is ticking out. So yeah.
Don't worry about time, I'll manage it. Sreejit, India today, what are the opportunities you see for a scholar like you, who is trying to not rewrite or reorient, but literally set a narrative, which is actually very refreshing, because it's high time we stop debunking, but actually set our narratives. So what do you see ahead of you?
Well, Alodi, opportunities galore, as I see it. Because India is such a vast place, the history of oppression, persecution, colonization, and the experience of it is highly localized, you know. There is a particular kind of all these experiences that have been gathered and chronicled, as well as written in the form of history by professional historians, trained historians in the south, in the western parts, and also in the eastern parts, in the north, you name it. And much of this information is written in the local languages, you know, the languages like Bangla, in Gujarati, in Marathi, and so on and so forth. So one of the opportunities, as I see it, is to bring out the information for a much more national and even international readership and disseminate this localized knowledge among them. For example, you know, talking about the particular interest which I am working on right now, the revolutionary nationalism from Bengal. It starts with the Swadeshi movement. And when we talk about Swadeshi movement for an English reading public, the only books that come up, maybe Sumit Sarkar's, you know, very famous book on Swadeshi movement, and talking about the phenomenon of revolutionary nationalism, we have something like Joya Ghosh's Bhadralok Terrorists, or something of that sort. That is the title of the book. So these books are the only ones that we have. Whereas I see that from where I come from, in Bengal, there are very good historical accounts written by professional historians like Professors Haridas Mukherjee and Uma Mukherjee, who have extensively worked on this particular field with particular attention given to Swadeshi movement and the phenomenon of revolutionary nationalism. Of course, they have also written in English. They have English books written, but they have written a vast amount of work in Bengali. So we'll have to mine these sources, and we have to bring it up to a national, wider readership. That is one. The other is, we have such narratives that are being passed as history, although they are written in more of a populist kind of a genre, where a certain kind of illusion is created about especially the Mughal era. And again, this takes back to what I was talking about in my opening statement, with the people who were the thought leaders in the 1905 era regarding during the time of Swadeshi movement. And they saw their main challenge as well as opportunity to be the creation of a national education, which is why people like Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, and Raja Subodh Chandra Mullik, all these people came together and they started a movement which was called Jatiyo Shiksha Porishad, or the National Council of Education. And they said, they were unanimous in their thinking, they said that the mainstay of this sort of national education would be a national history, which has been written from an emic perspective or from the insider's perspective. I know Dr. Jain has been talking about this, and also yesterday we saw some of the respected speakers talk about the necessity to go on producing scholarship, and there is no other easy way out of this. We have to get our hands dirty, we have to go to the archives, but with a new perspective, which has been hitherto shoved to the sidelines. For example, we have such renowned historians like Dr. R.C. Mojumdar, who had faced this sort of persecution, if I can call it that. And therefore, we have to own that insider perspective and write historical narratives about our country. We have to point out as far as we can, as best as we can, where our national spirit lies. That is very, very important. Once that is defined, then we will have a consensus on, and an intellectual consensus, not just from the perspective of feeling, which is very, very true, because we are talking about nationalism, which has as a very big element the element of love. It is our love for country, and I'm sure many of us will agree that love is very, very difficult to define. But we'll have to intellectualize it, and that will give us a sort of platform, a sort of perspective, a solid thing on which we can stand and talk about our country in our own way. That's where the opportunities lie.
Thank you very much. With that, we end the discussion. To questions for the audience. We have about 8 minutes. Speak into the mic. Wait for the mic to reach you. Keep your questions short. Desist from giving opinion. Just keep them short and direct.
Good evening to all of you. My question is about the Indian architecture. My name is Ashish. As we see that all the Indian citizens mostly aware about the Mughal architecture, and everyone knows about Pietra Dora and Indo-Islamic architecture and all. But very few of people know about the temple architecture and the different styles of the architecture coming under the temple architecture. So why this Indian architecture is thriving with this kind of mentality, and why it is under the lamp of the knowledge?
So, so in the opening remarks itself, I stated that I'm a student of architecture, and there's a very interesting subject called history of architecture. So if we as so-called professional experts of the subject are not given much light of what's happened in India. Now, again, when we talk about Indian architecture, interestingly, our focus again comes down to only temple. But Indian architecture, of course, revolves around a temple, because we had the Republic of Temple system altogether, how you say. But there was a lot of indigenous methods of building the houses. Now, right now, when you look at the buildings, right, what you see in perhaps in Hyderabad, the same building would be seen in Bangalore. the same building would be standing somewhere in Delhi if it's an IT building. So there is no sense of respect to the climate, and there is no sense to respect to the context. Now, we have failed to understand the indigenous architecture, which was very much practiced among the common people. Now, this has happened largely because, of course, one sense is ignorance, and we always look upon the West to copying the ideas. Being a designer, I can always say that we feel very happy doing something which has happened in the West and bringing it back here. Even client will be even more happy to explore into it. So what is happening across in the commercial sector, that will further even influence in the academia when it comes to understanding the past. That imprint certainly carries forward, and we are not taught much about it.
Can I also add something to your question?
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
It's a very interesting question that you have asked. And I want to draw your attention to a very openly stated Mughal policy. And we have farmans, for example, of Shah Jahan, which he said, in no highway or main road is any architecture or building to be seen except a mosque or an Eidgah. So all the sacred structures of every other site were pushed to the sidelines. I'll give you the example of Delhi. You know, Delhi, the Shah Jahanabad, old Delhi, it was just opposite the Red Fort, which was where the emperor used to live. And so all the main roads on Purani Delhi, or what we call Chandni Chowk area, all the lanes, by lanes, all had mosques. Even a place like Katra Neel, which was totally occupied by Hindus, only had mosques on the main streets. Now, when the British occupied Delhi, they did a census of the architectural buildings of Red Fort and Shah Jahanabad. All right? And they found that they could find no temple in Chandni Chowk or the city which was predominantly Hindu. So they said that Shah Jahanabad is the area where the prominent jewelers, Dariba, we still have Dariba, all the prominent traders, jewelers who were Hindus were living there. How is it that there is no temple in Shah Jahanabad or Chandni Chowk? And you'll be surprised when they did a house-to-house survey what they found. They found that these Havelis of the Hindu merchants and traders, they had high walls, and inside the wall there were small openings that we call alas. Where you still have alas where you can put something. And that is the size to which Hindu temples had been reduced from what they were when we saw them at the Qutub complex. So, this constant attempt on imperial orders to push out of public view the architecture and sacred structures of every other community is the reason that you asked this question. And this is something that we should all know. Thank you for asking this question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, my question is to Dr. Jain, and I'd like to know if there are any primary sources that relate to how temples used to function back in, let's say, 100 AD or along those...
Hear the question actually. Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, is this better? Yes. Yeah, so I'm just asking if there's any primary source that tries to showcase or describe how temples used to be in the ancient times, and how the temples acted as a source of income for the people. And
see, there are ancient texts which describe Nagra style of architecture, for example. There were two main styles of architecture, temple architecture, Nagra and the Dravida style. The Dravida style survived almost intact because the attacks from the north were not as severe as they were. Attacks from the north were much more severe than they were in the south. In the north, no temple before the 18th century survives. But when temple construction resumed in the 18th century, then they went back to the Shastras, and the Nagra style is based on that architecture. There are absolute important texts that have survived, and a temple architecture of the north is built on that style. Thank you.
One last question, quick answer.
Namaskar. मेरा क्वेश्चन है डॉक्टर रत्नू की तरफ। मुझे एक बात पूछनी थी कि ये राजपूत हैं हम लोग राजपूत, अपने हिस्ट्री पे बहुत हमें गर्व है, लेकिन ये जो नाम है राजपूत, ये जो कह के सरनेम है, ये बहुत सारे मुस्लिम्स ने हाईजैक किया हुआ है और वो अपने आप को राजपूत कहते हैं। तो इस बारे में आप कुछ कहना चाहें। और दूसरी बात ये है कि हम प्रैक्टिकली जो हिंदूज़ हैं उनके लिए जो कुछ कर रहे हैं, आप कर रहे हैं, आपकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन कर रही है, तो उसमें किस तरह से आम हिंदू हिस्सा ले सकते हैं। ये 2 क्वेश्चंस हैं मेरे। थैंक यू।
धन्यवाद इस प्रश्न के लिए। राजपूत अगर कोई मुसलमान अपने आप को कहता है तो वो अपने आप में एक पैराडॉक्स है, एक कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन है, क्योंकि जो इस्लाम का मुख्य जो क्लेम है वो ये है कि दे आर अ क्लासलेस सोसाइटी। तो वो राजपूत समाज से वो आइडेंटिफाई कैसे कर रहा है वो उसके किसी मौलवी वौलवी से पूछ के बता दे। मेरा ऐसे व्यक्ति को केवल एक ही सजेशन है, कोई मुसलमान यदि अपने आप को राजपूत कहता है तो मैं उसे कहता हूँ, हाँ भाई तू राजपूत है, पहले घर वापसी कर ले। एज सिंपल एज दैट। अगर आप हिंदू बन जाते हैं तो आप फिर कास्ट सिस्टम आपको अडॉप्ट कर लेगा, आप राजपूत बने, आप ब्राह्मण बने, आपको जो बनना वो बने। थोड़ा सा आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट है वो आपका प्रश्न की। निमित्त एकम जो हमारी संस्था है पाकिस्तानी हिंदुओं के लिए, उसकी वेबसाइट पे जाएं। देयर आर ओनली 2 थिंग्स टू बी डन। आप इस इशू पर कम से कम अपनी चेतना को तो जगाएं। 1 करोड़ हिंदू पाकिस्तान में कुत्ते की जिंदगी जी रहे हैं केवल इसलिए कि वो हिंदू हैं। They begin a life at a disadvantage just because they are born in as a Hindu. We must be sensitive. 100 crore Hindu Samaj must be sensitive and reach out. At least start talking about the genocide that's happening in Pakistan. Enough data is available now. Citizenship amendment has been passed by a sovereign country's sovereign parliament. What more endorsement of this genocide needs the world needs? So at least the Hindu Samaj has to take cognizance of that. Number 2, go to the website, give 100 rupees, 200 rupees, dharmansh. The cost of taking one Hindu out of Pakistan is 8,000 Indian rupees. We need all the money we can to take the Hindus out of the Pakistan. Thank you so much. I will deviate it.
On that note, we end this session, and we have just about shot off the time limit. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.